Hello, Professor. Good afternoon. It's great honor to see and just interview.
Hello, 안녕하세요.
Oh, thank you.
So he's going to sit a meter apart from me so I can take off my...
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Right. Okay. I'm really happy. So, wow. So you were the...
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Fine.
Can you hear me?
So I have seen your list of questions and I will give you a short reply, hopefully. Talk to you now. So,
yeah, so one by one, let me give you one question.
Do you want to read the question? Do you want me to read the question, or?
I think I can just give you a question. You can just make an answer. You can just
Fine.
respond to me with your answer very simply. So, yeah, you don't have to worry about that, right? So, great. Let's. Okay.
Are you connected?
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Get started. Okay.
Yes.
So, good afternoon, Professor Vitit. It's a great honor to just have an interview with such a world-renowned, such a law scholar like you. So by way of introduction, could you tell us a little about your family and early days?
I come from a medical family.
Oh, really?
My father was a doctor in the United Kingdom during the war. And when he came back, he was a pioneer surgeon who started heart surgery in Thailand. And he met my mom and they got married and they had 3 children and I'm the second one. So the first son is a doctor also, ENT. I'm the coincidental lawyer. And my sister is a musician cum lawyer living in the States. So we had links with the United Kingdom for some time, and that was one of the reasons why I was sent to the UK quite early on at the age of 9, and went to partly primary school there and then secondary school and then university. And I also worked in the UK. I taught for a year, and I'm also a barrister, a lawyer from the United Kingdom, even though I don't practice. And as you know, I went to Belgium to do another degree after 2 degrees in the UK and the barrister law exams. And then I came back after age 26, 27. And then I've been here ever since.
Oh, really?
And I've been at the same university ever since. And there is a very good reason for that. And the reason is that I've enjoyed very much working for Chulalongkorn University. I've grown up with the students and the teachers and the faculty, and it's a bit like a family to me. So I'm very honored, and it gives me great pleasure to help the faculty. I look at the university as a family.
Yeah. So you went to Oxford to study law. How and when did you come to? And you also studied the Free University of Brussels. But who were your mentors and what were the most important lessons they taught you? And which college in Oxford did you study?
I went to Oxford at the beginning of the 1970s. I did 2 degrees in Oxford. One was the bachelor's, which Oxford style became a master's in jurisprudence later. And then I did the graduate degree in Oxford, known as BCL, Bachelor of Civil Law, which is actually a graduate degree, it's a master's. And I was very taken by Oxford. I was very enamored with Oxford. It taught me something totally different. It taught me culture of education beyond schooling. It taught me the meaning of culture. It wasn't just law. Arts. I used to like going to the theatre in Oxford, particularly plays, Shakespearean plays in the gardens. And I enjoyed very much friendships across different colleges. As you know, Oxford is a
college system
of different autonomous colleges, but my friends were all over the place. And in fact,
which college?
2 or 3 of my best friends are from other colleges. I was at Keble. Keble is one of the newer colleges. It's a sort of high church set up from over a century ago, set up by John Keble, who was a religious man. And it used to be known as, I think, a college for people of modest means. And it used to be an all-male college. But since recent times, it's become by gender, so to speak. It's not now much more gregarious in terms of its own outputs and inputs. It's doing very well academically. It's got a new part which was finished recently before COVID, where you have a lot of graduate students coming to join, as distinguished from the undergrad setup, which I belong to. And as you know, the Oxford system is collegiate, and it's tutorial based.
Tutorial based.
So it means that you have tutors. It's 2 to 1. So I actually learned critical analysis from Oxford, and that's what I cherish most. Not the subject of law so much, but the methodology of learning, of comparing. And I think that's the crunch of academic education, actually. It must be critical analysis, which means access to a variety of sources of information. And in fact, the way I teach, particularly the students, the first promise we almost make together actually is the ethical promise with the students. And I sort of learned this from Oxford in terms of respecting different sources.
I think it's really
no plagiarization, the need to read many sources and then come to your own analysis without believing first. And so that came very much from Oxford, because when I was at school, the sources were still limited. We were still very much linked with 1 or 2 books and so on. But at Oxford, it was a whole variety of information. And, you'd be reading 20 to 50 cases, hundreds of pages sometimes.
Hundreds of pages for one case.
And then having to compare them and then having to back up documents. And so that's really how I was nurtured in terms of an understanding of pluralism of information and the importance to check and balance. And then I did the BCL after the undergrad degree. I did the BCL, which was a graduate degree, is a graduate degree of Oxford. And my tutor for international law was Professor Brownlee.
Oh, really? He was in Oxford College.
Yeah, he was. So I was taught by Brownlee at both the undergraduate level and the graduate level.
Graduate level.
And I don't claim to be an exceptional student at all. I think I was. I learned to improve after. And my private international law professor was Sir Peter North, Professor North, who you might know from Cheshire North Private International Law textbook. So I had great sort of progenitors of international law and law, and I had a great jurisprudence teacher who was actually a blind person, but wonderful.
So,
jurisprudence person. So I had some excellent teachers, and they taught me not to believe too much, but to disbelieve before believing, and then with reason. So I sort of summarize all that by saying, well, basically academic university education must be geared towards critical analysis. And that's how I try to teach here, even though our classes are much bigger. You can't do tutorials 2 by 1 like Oxford. There's a lot of investment to do 2 students and 1 professor at Oxford.
Professor, right?
And then you'd have separate lectures for everybody. But basically, you meet up with your professor at least 2 a week, usually.
At least 2
2 to 1 basis.
2 to 1.
And it's a hugely beneficial to the student, because you get direct attention. It's not like lecturing to I have some classes here, 200 students, and you just can't do the 2 to 1 person, so to speak. But we have other ways of dealing with big classes, which I also use.
Wow.
So that's Oxford. And then I actually didn't quite intend to be a teacher. I was thinking around what I would do. In fact, I was more interested in seeing the world. So after my second degree at Oxford, I was thinking going to do some sort of international traveling. And I used to hitchhike a lot. Used to hitchhike in Europe. I used to sleep on the streets, sleep in airports. Yeah, wow. I'm an old hitchhiker, and I discovered a lot of my life through hitchhiking, and I still credit a lot of myself to it. It taught me about a sense of humanity, taught me a bit to be more down to earth, to appreciate the basics of life, to live without much. I've been homeless, you know.
Wow. You were there. You at that time homeless.
Yeah, I slept in shelters. I slept in
everywhere is your home.
Yeah, for many years. I slept by the side of a road.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I sort of appreciate people's challenges when there are very, very basic things that we go through. So my education is not just academic.
I understand academics, but
it's very down to earth. And I think, in fact, I mean, I can talk about the degrees, but it's not just that at all. I just finished the degrees, and then I'll talk about the other stuff. But to finish off with the degrees before my other world-linked education, which is something very
invisible degrees from Oxford, invisible degrees from the road.
Yeah. So quickly, I'll just finish with the formal education. So after Oxford, coincidentally, I was asked to go to an interview at Reading University, which is just down the road from Oxford on the way to London, at the law faculty. Somebody rang me up and said, they're quite interested in you. Will you go for an interview? So I got the job. So I was teaching English law, and I started to teach international law at Reading. And Reading is a very famous university for various reasons. You know, there's a prison next door, very famous prison. Oscar Wilde, who was gay, was imprisoned at Reading jail. So Reading's very famous, not because of university necessarily, but because of the link with Oscar Wilde.
True
and it's very interesting that after all that, you know, I became the UN independent expert on LGBTI, so to speak, many years later. But we'll come to that later.
Yeah, it's very funny
So
story.
after that, I did the bar exams. I did 1 year teaching at Reading. I felt I wanted to broaden my life. I went to do the bar exam, the barrister law. So I'm a barrister, I'm an English barrister at the Middle Temple. I qualified. I did all my practical exercises. I practicum in court.
Did you practice there?
I didn't like it.
Did you practice in the UK, actually?
I didn't like it.
You didn't like it, okay.
No, I didn't want to go.
So let me just jump to another academic question with you. You have researched and taught on a wide range of subjects in public international law at Chulalongkorn University, which is the really top leading institution in the world. What is your academic focus is human rights. So what is the significance of human rights in your life as an academic?
Well, it's very much linked up with what we were saying. I was saying earlier. That's I've learned not just from universities. And just to finish, I mean, after my bar exams in London, I got a scholarship to Belgium, and with that scholarship, I did a master's in European law. One of the first from Thailand, I think, to do a master's in European law in French at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. And then after that, I came back to Thailand. But just to link up the academic and the non-academic stuff, my groundwork in terms of education is partly academic through universities and being a teacher. And the other part is learning from life. So the first entry point in terms of human rights for me was hitchhiking for 6 years in Europe.
Right.
Because I that's how I discovered the world. I discovered people's kindness. I discovered poverty. Because I was also sometimes poor on the streets and so on. I remember vagrants on the streets. I remember sleeping with a lot of people from the streets in in Sicily, for example, in the train station at Palermo. And I also remember kind people who invited me home to have a meal, and so on. And that was the same in many, many places. So formative years from my teens till my 20s, I learned a lot from being grounded through hitchhiking. The other formative element of my work was I used to do social work, helping senior citizens when I was a kid, when I was at school, at secondary school. So I would ride my bike and I would go and clean windows and prune trees, all for free, usually on Wednesdays. And it was an option instead of being forced to play sports every day. You could choose to do something else. And so I chose to do what we call voluntary service. So I've always been a volunteer, and I still am, you know. Every week I do voluntary work free because I think it's a part of me. And I think that's my groundwork also for human rights. So hitchhiking, yes, and very importantly, voluntary service as a volunteer from my teens, from age of 15, 16, 17, until now. And the third element was, which really introduced me to human rights was when I started university work in Thailand, the students invited me to do rural development work, to visit northeastern Thailand, where it was very poor. No electricity, no water. And so we raise funds, go with the students, and then we build schools, build libraries, parts of schools and roads. So I did that for 6 years, from my very first year as a university teacher. I used to raise funds also and work in Chulalongkorn, Faculty of Law. We have a summer camp for voluntary work in rural areas, and this is still happening today. So I was doing this for 6 years. So 6 years, and really, I think the inspiration for my human rights work is from those experiences. And I suppose the fourth experience, apart from hitchhiking, voluntary work, rural development work with students and teachers, I also started to witness certain human rights situations without my knowing. I was witnessing in the I started as teacher in 1978 at Chulalongkorn. And in 1979, we had a mass influx of refugees. So I was on the border and I was witnessing refugee influxes, and I didn't know anything.
From where?
But I thought, why don't I start to learn about people's perceptions to do with refugee influxes? So I would go in and interview people near the border about how they viewed things in terms of influxes. And that's how I started to also to understand about refugee protection, but not just refugee protection, also shared protection and help for local people. So I write a lot about refugees, but I always say, don't forget about the local people who are affected by refugee influxes. And I don't wish to see discrimination in terms of aid and assistance. Local people also need help, such as food, water, medicine, just as refugees would need. So, you know, it's a sort of complementary process in terms of helping, but also being helped when you need help. So that was another eye-opener. And at the same time as doing that, I was doing all these rural development projects, and then it sort of expanded into outreach projects with other people, ultimately to do some legal dissemination, legal education programs for rural people and others, which then became informal, non-formal education programs for different groups to do with children and others. And so I've always been involved with informal, non-formal work as well, in terms of education for different groups, just as I'm still involved today in terms of non-formal education. So I'm not just a formal academic at all. I don't wish to see myself as a formal academic. I see myself as something else. I see myself as a catalyst, as a person who helps with change, as a change agent. That's what I am.
Realizing your human rights law expertise.
So I use human rights law as a catalytic entry point.
Actually, human rights lawyer as well as practitioner.
Yeah, so I think that's a response to your
activist.
Question, the inspiration for human rights work.
Okay.
And the last thing to note is that human rights wasn't taught at Oxford. There was no course then on human rights.
Of course.
No, not when I was a student. And when I was at Brussels, there was one course, but it was about European Convention of Human Rights.
European Convention of Human Rights.
Which was not adequate to me. So I learned human rights from the field, from doing work here, and then gradually writing, gradually teaching, and so on. So I built up my knowledge base inductively, which means learning from experience, and then spreading out in terms of my knowledge base. So that's how it came into being.
Great. Okay. And what was your inspiration to choose the career as a law professor in university rather than practitioner?
Oh, it's a coincidence. As I said,
you like that?
At the time of Oxford, you know, I wasn't intending to go to teach at Reading.
Oh, Reading.
It was a coincidence. It's my karma, you know, it's my half destiny. I'm existentialist as well, but I think you know, you shape your destiny as well. So you know, the first introduction to teaching was at Reading, and I don't think of myself as a good teacher. I don't think I was a good teacher. I was just learning how to be a teacher and trying to improve. You know, when I was beginning, I didn't think I could write. I didn't think I could write as an academic. And I wasn't even sure about being an academic. I wanted to do something international. I wanted to see the world. And I came back to Thailand in 1978 after Brussels degree, partly by a coincidence. My grandmom died. And so I came back instead of going to hitchhike in South America, which is what I wanted to do. I came back to Thailand in 1978. And then I chatted with my dad. And then my dad's a professor at Chulalongkorn, heart surgery. And with him, I went to apply at the Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University in 1978 to be a lecturer. So that's how it began, slightly as a coincidence. But now I know why. I now know why I became a lecturer.
Why?
It's because to be a lecturer, but not just to be a lecturer, to be a change agent. I'm a catalyst. I'd like to be a catalyst. In other words, I'm not just an academic at all. I don't wish to be just an academic. I wish to use my knowledge to change things. And I try to give hope. I try to enable people to see a certain light without despairing. Because, you know, there's so many desperate issues on earth and so many difficult things happening like COVID. But the way I try and teach and work with people is to say, look, we must generate and project hope. And while we can't win on everything today, or maybe never, we can still do a lot of things. And let's do it like that. And don't be despondent, don't despair. In fact, I'm having to be a sort of academic psychologist. I try to motivate people in the human rights field not to despair, and to enable them to see that there are niches that they can make, through which they can make a difference. So a lot of the sessions actually with NGOs and others are very much counseling sessions to enable people to see that they don't have to despair. And we're not going to win everything today, but that's all right. That's life. But we can still make incremental changes and be alive and hopeful about the future, despite all the difficulties around us. That's my work.
So inspirational. Oh, wow.
Not really. I'm just the inspiration comes from other people who've been great to me, like
you're just people. A very pure academic before just having interview, but you're really inspirational and you give me a lot of some impression to.
Well, thank you. The credit is not to me. The credit is to all the victims, all the rural people, the leaders, and the leaders in the communities at the village level. Who taught me a lot about kindness. The credit goes to people who've been kind to me, actually.
Yeah, you're like some religious activist to
I'm not religious. I'm not religious in that sense. I'm slightly spiritual in my work, but I'm not religious necessarily. I can go to any temple, or don't go to a temple. I've been a monk, though.
I used to go to the temple in Thailand because I'm actually the Buddhist, but I'm secular, but I'm Buddhist. So I used to go to the temples with the Professor Limsi, right? Every now and then in Thailand. Anyway, so we go to the more theoretical problem. The international protection of human rights is a fundamental tenet of post-war international law. However, this principle is distorted by political interest of each state at the moment. Do you think
I didn't quite hear because we lost you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so more. So international protection of human rights is a fundamental tenet of post-war international law. However, this principle is distorted by the political interest of each state. Do you think such law can truly promote human rights despite its political manipulation?
Well, the number one answer is to examine oneself as a teacher, because we are all faced with politics at the national level, some more than others. And in Thailand, we're in a half democracy. You know, we're still under a continued semi-junta rule at this point in time. And I've lived under half democracies for a long time, while not forsaking my principles. So I think the word is to be artistic, to survive as an artist, but not to lose all your principles. So there's an art of survival as an academic in a non-democratic system. And we're still under semi-non-democratic system in Thailand. So the way we convey information, the way we speak, the way we enable students to open up, but also to have parameters so as to protect them from encroachments by others. All these are elements of an artistic modus vivendi, modus operandi.
Modus vivendi.
So I've survived here for 40 years, and to live with a certain humble artistry, A-R-T-I-S-T-R-Y, humble artistry is very important in terms of knowing how to communicate, knowing where you can make a real point very directly, or sometimes body language. Sometimes you have to be a bit more careful. Sometimes I can't complain here, but I can complain through the United Nations, especially if I'm in a position of the UN, or sometimes I don't just write academic stuff, I write for the newspapers. So my communications are directly with at least the English-speaking public in Thailand, very directly. I mean, my last article was last week on the death penalty. In the Bangkok Post, you can have a look. It's all free, you know, so I write for the
open access
media. So I don't just communicate in one way, but I look at multiple forms of communication, and I operate at different levels. And that's why I refuse to be stuck. I refuse to be despondent. I refuse to be in despair, because I have different ways of operating. And I think that's the first answer. And how to deal with the politics around academia and around us generally, in a way that we can also survive if we choose to survive in this setting. I chose to be here. I want to live here, you know. I don't want to be a refugee elsewhere. I want to live here. So there's a way of living, and I'm still here. And I can make a lot of difference, because I can negotiate with a lot of people on behalf of other people also, and help them with leveraging. So that's the answer to the political question that you asked me. And I think the answer is to have a certain artistry, humble artistry in terms of survival. Modus operandi and modus vivendi, especially in non-democratic or semi-democratic states. And I wish to be here, and I wish to broaden people's space, civic space, civil society space, particularly on all the rights and freedoms, civil, political, economic, social, cultural. And I have different ways of operating. As I said, I mean, just last week, I was lobbying through my newspaper article on abolition of the death penalty through research, but conveyed through the media directly in half a page. And of course, it's not just half a page, it's on the internet, it went out and so on and so on. Much quicker than any book that I can write. So
available
yes,
in English?
to be an academic in the political world, but to be humbly wise about how to survive, but how to make a difference as an academic. But as I said, I'm not just an academic. I aspire to be, coincidentally, a change agent, a catalyst. And that's what I try to be.
Yeah. Okay. So as regards the human rights activities, you have held a number of high-ranking positions at the United Nations related to human rights. Could you provide us any insight about the UN's day-to-day human rights activities?
My first involvement with the UN was again a bit coincidental. It's a bit
again coincidentally.
You know, why? Because in 1979, I was observing refugees, Cambodian refugees particularly, and others, but particularly Cambodian mass influx. And there was an invitation to the law faculty for someone to write a paper on law and policy concerning refugees in Thailand.
Refugees in Thailand.
And the dean called me and said, Vitit, would you like to do this paper and then present it at this international conference organized by UNHCR in the Philippines?
UNHCR.
And I said, no. I said, no, because I was doing rural development. I was doing sort of building work in northeastern Thailand. And I said, I don't know about this. Even though I've been witnessing, but I don't know the law, so to speak. And the dean said to me, please do it.
Please do it.
So I said, okay, all right, I'll try. So I had about 5 days to do that paper. So I
just 5 days. 5 days.
Dashed around all over Bangkok, you know. Not many articles and research. But I went to all these different places, you know. I'm a sort of active researcher. So I went to Faculty of Political Science. I picked out 1 or 2 theses, went to see professors on sociology, on political science. And I'd been interviewing people also, coincidentally, because I was interviewing people on perceptions towards refugees by the border. And so I wrote my first paper, and that became the first article, pretty well from Thailand, Mission Thai, published, but also by UNHCR in its documentation, 1979-80. So that was the first piece. And then I presented the paper in Manila, and UNHCR liked it. And so they invited me to join the UNHCR working group on refugee protection in Southeast Asia. So I became a member of a UNHCR working group on refugee protection in Southeast Asia. So that's how it began, as a member of a UNHCR body. But that's UNHCR. But if you're talking about human rights, OHCHR and Human Rights Commission, that sort of evolved.
That's different, a little bit different.
Because from 1980 onwards, I started to write in English and Thai. So I started to publish in English and Thai. And even though I never thought I could really write, I started to write. And then I started to publish. And I just thought, but I'd done my groundwork, you know, it wasn't sedentary book work. It was live research, dashing around, looking at people, talking with them, learning from them, being inspired by them. So I started to write more and more and more and publish internationally from 1980s onwards, initially on refugees and then others, and then on all kinds of things. Women's issues. I wrote reports for the Women's Commission here on women's development. And I'm the author of the first country report of Thailand for CEDAW. I wrote the first country report.
Your own country
for the Women's Convention.
Right. Wow.
Because of my work with women's groups in the 1970s, 80s. Yeah. So that's another way, you know. And then I was working a lot on children's issues and so on, child protection, countering child sexual exploitation, doing education work and advocacy work. And then in 1990, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, as it then was, set up this first mandate on children, the sale of children, child prostitution, child pornography, which has now been adjusted to be sale of children and sexual exploitation of children. And I was invited by the chair of the then Human Rights Commission as the first UN special rapporteur on the sale of children. So well, you can tap in all the reports, all the UN reports from that era. So I did that for 4 years. And then after 4 years, I left that. And then after that, I was asked by the UN Center for Human Rights, and then which became OHCHR after the World Conference on Human Rights in the 1990s. I was asked to be a member of the OHCHR advisory board of the UN Voluntary Fund for Technical Cooperation on Human Rights, which is still there. And I was on the advisory board for several years, promoting technical help, financial help for field programming all over the place. And as part of that, I was also doing field visits here and there, including, I think, I think I visited Cambodia just before or after that post. And then in 2004, while I was still a member of that board of OHCHR, I was invited to be the first UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of rights in DPR, Korea.
Yes, I would like to just give you some questions about that from 2004 and to 2010. You served.
So I did that for full 6 years.
UN
and it was
special.
A terrific mandate. I really, I feel very heartened by the mandate. I liked it so much. You know, it was tough, but it was such a great experience, and
how
great for many reasons.
North Korea. Have you been to North Korea at the time to check the human rights situation of that country? Or what impression did you get from the activities or leading the UN activities to promote human rights in the DPRK? Yeah, it was very serious, sometimes dreadful. As far as concerned, I would like to share with some viewers about your experience. From the UN activities.
Well,
for human rights.
It's like the media, you know. In 2004, your media from Seoul would ring me up and say, "Why you or why me?
Why you? Why?
What have you got to do with the Korean Peninsula?" So I said, well, you might not know, South Koreans might not know that I was sent by lawyers groups for human rights in 1987. Before my first rapporteurship in 1987, I was sent to your country, the Republic of Korea, as an election observer. So I was an election observer in Daegu.
There was some presidential action just after some big democratic movement.
And then you had the first presidential elections. And I was an election observer going between all the polling booths of the three Kims and so on.
Oh, do you remember?
So that was 1987. So I started to feel at home on the peninsula from then on, and started to know. And then in 2004, I think one of the reasons why they chose me was that the mandate of DPR Korea was so sensitive that if it had been an academic or someone else from a developed country, from another region, it would have been very difficult politically. So I think the politics of it all meant that they were looking for someone from Asia. And as a balance.
Has balance.
And so they approached me. So the chair of the Human Rights Commission then invited me, and I said yes. And now with these country mandates, it is often the case that you don't have access because the country disagrees with the mandate. And so DPR Korea, or North Korea in colloquial terms, disagreed with the mandate and never allowed me in. But I had a way of managing, and I got a lot of information from many sources. So it would have been good to have a visit, and I would have been very constructive, and to recognize what I would see and witness fairly. But even without a visit, I was never short of information. In fact, in the reports, some 10 UN reports that I wrote them myself. I typed them myself. I wrote them all myself. I could only put in about a third or half of the information I knew, because the art of doing UN reports is not necessarily to write about everything, but the art is not to write about some things. So again, being artistic in terms of one's modus operandi. So I would write those reports, and then I was always diplomatic, principled and diplomatic. I was always respectful. I would brief the various countries that voted no, that disagreed with the mandate. I briefed all the key no votes, actually, consistently. So in a way, ironically, they found within me, I think, someone they could trust, because I was honest with them. And yet the way they voted against this mandate was because of the politics of it all. But the truth is still the truth, especially if it's done by someone who's pro bono, who has a certain, I think, a credible record internationally, and conveyed in a certain way. So I don't think the no votes necessarily denied the facts at all, but they voted no because it was politically a no vis-a-vis a country mandate. And DPR Korea invited me to see them in Geneva once. Once.
Yeah, once.
And I think it was the only time. It was the only time they ever invited any special rapporteur. But in Geneva. I went, and I had a nice chat with them, and I was always constructive with them. We would send the draft report to them before publication, in accordance with protocol. And you know, when they were making statements in the plenaries, of course, they were always very vocal, very heavy in terms of rebuttal, rejection of the UN, rejection of my report. But in the corridors, when I would meet them, in the corridors, quietly, I shake hands with them. And even one gentleman who I met, who will remain nameless, said, "How are you, Vitit? When are you going home? And is everything all right?" And so nice conversation on the sideline. And so it was never something personal. In terms of antipathy or the aggressiveness of attacks on either side. It was a principled affair. You know, I understood that they were protecting their authorities and so on, even though, of course, I wouldn't agree with the policies in the country concerned. But it was like that for 6 years. And likewise, all the no votes. And even I met, many years later, I met one of the diplomats
from North Korea,
from the mission of DPRK, and he had a very nice chat. He chatted very nicely with me, and it's exactly what I'm telling you now. I mean, it was, and he said something like, "It's nothing personal at all, you know, all the heavy stuff," and he appreciated the fact that I was trying to be fair, actually, but of course, you know, the public posture. What's necessary for diplomats to survive. You know, diplomats are also humans, and they and their families also have to survive under various conditions. And so they have to be artistic also in a certain way to survive in a certain way.
I think
so. That's it, and that's 6 years, a full 6 years of DPR Korea work, and I still get a lot of questions about the work and so on. Even now, I'm supposed to reply to a list of questions this week for some entity in South Korea, but I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to do it because I'm working on Cambodia at the moment. Today is the start of my mandate as UN Special Rapporteur on Cambodia. Starts today, 1st of May. So,
wow.
So it starts today.
We have many.
So it's slightly, it's coincidental, isn't it, for you? It's a bit of a karma talking with you about this when I start the UN mandate on Cambodia today.
So do you have much more information that were not released yet? Do you have much more information on North Korean human rights problem for your mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur, which have not been released?
A
lot of.
No, in that sense, I mean, what was releasable was written and conveyed orally. Yeah. And remember that the report is done several months before one would appear before the Human Rights Council. So when you appear at the Human Rights Council, you update the report and you respond to questions and answers. So there's a lot of updating orally, which is then documented in the summary records of the Human Rights Council for 6 years. Yeah. And then with the country visits, of course, I would visit, I wasn't allowed into North Korea, EPR Korea, but I used to go to Mongolia, I used to go to South Korea, I used to go to Japan because of various issues. And I was very well received, and I'm very respectful of their kindness towards me. And I wish to thank all those countries for hosting me informally and very constructively in terms of enabling me to link up well with the constituents of the mandate.
Yes. Okay, another question. Today, the world is focused on COVID-19 pandemic. All the vaccines have been developed. They have not been fairly distributed by some advanced countries and global pharmaceutical companies. Now, what do you think will be the role of international law in the post-COVID-19 era?
Every human rights entity, including all rapporteurs now, all working groups, all UN agencies have to do with COVID.
Yeah.
And I'm stuck at home. I'm in a slight lockdown. So personally, I have to deal with COVID, but academically or for the UN, I have to deal with COVID. And I think there are 2 or 3 considerations that are pervasive. Number one is that, as I say, and you can see this from my newspaper articles in the Bangkok Post last year on impact of COVID. Just tap in and see what I wrote on national security. Number one is this: every country, democratically or not democratically established in terms of government, is faced with increase of executive power. Every country, because of COVID, has witnessed accumulation of executive power, whether they're Democrats or not, but of course, particularly difficult in non-democratic countries. And I think that is a very important truism, but it's a truth that we should not forget. Whatever the so-called beneficence of the executive branch. And I think it invites us to think around checks and balances, to be careful about the accumulation of power in the executive hands, including in this country, including your country.
They're now representing.
The second one, the second one is this:
international
securitization. The security element has become blown up even more, not just under the rubric of national security, but now under public health. So how do you deal with full-blown
of this
exposition of national security under the rubric of public health, especially when rights and freedoms are being constrained? And there's one ironic phrase I would cite with you. It's my humble phrase, and it is this: even if we have a lockdown in medical terms, it should not necessarily mean a clampdown in political terms. So that's a very difficult situation where not only do you find a lockdown like staying home now, but clampdown on rights and freedoms, particularly expression. Assembly and so on.
Assembly.
So the clampdown is often excessive. And we have international standards on this, such as the ICCPR, Article 4, in terms of some rights which you can limit, but if you're going to limit those rights, the government, the authorities everywhere must prove, number one, that it's not arbitrary action. It's not just discretion, and that is the principle of legality. Number two, clamp down or not, whatever constraints on freedoms, the government has to prove that it is really necessary according to the exigencies.
What do you mean to clamp down in this context? What do you mean?
Clamp down means on civil rights and freedoms.
Repression, right? Okay, repression.
Okay. So I'm playing with words: lockdown and clamp down. Even if you have constraints on rights and freedoms, the government has to prove that it's in accordance with the principle of necessity, which is an international principle. It's a part of ICCPR Article 4. And thirdly, the principle of proportionality. Whatever the government does should be proportionate to the risks and threats. So very often you have excessive measures in relation to the risks. For example, some countries, all right, maybe there's a lockdown, but some people are dissatisfied, so they make a comment. They make a comment, or they may come up. They must come out and demonstrate a little bit. But the clampdown is that they are prosecuted under the criminal law, subject to penalties, inordinate, exorbitant penalties of several years, or of possible imprisonment, or fines, very high sums and so on, far beyond what is proportionate to what they've done. So that principle is also very important in terms of proportionality. So that's how it is at the moment. And then that's the securitization angle. So be very careful with securitization and the need for some parameters under human rights law on national security, national health, public health. And third one is, of course, we don't forget about poverty, or all the socioeconomic, cultural needs, as well as access to vaccination today. And every country has witnessed increase in poverty, displacement, people pushed out of work, people discriminated against, hate speech, and now this run and rush to access vaccines where rich get more access than poor and so on. So all these things are very much at play with the spread of COVID in terms of the implications for economic, social, cultural rights, and more, because of course the civil political rights are very much linked with the securitization angle and the accumulation of executive power that I just listed for you as 2 or 3 factors to consider. So accumulation of executive power, securitization, deprivations, and the gamut of rights being impacted upon, civil, political, economic, social.
So these 3 factors are great lessons from you, and how to just strike the balance is
well, it's for us to help.
Critical point.
So academics, change agents help to try to provide a balance, huh? And that's why check and balance is very important.
Balance, right?
Because the courts are sometimes very dormant now, but others can speak out a bit more. But with good reason, eh? You should just do whatever you can under the parameters available. Because remember again, when some of us are not working in democracies. Huh?
Wow. Yeah, and more like some questions. So recently, more Asian lawyers have become involved in international research and practice. What advice would you give the younger generation of scholars and practitioners who study international law in Asia?
I usually invite students not only to be academic in terms of accessing written sources and coming to classes and so on, but to open their eyes. So when I started as a teacher many years ago with the human rights course, we would have an outing where we would go to the slums or the children's homes to visit and then to talk and then be grounded. So experiential learning is very important.
Yes.
In more recent years, I've not been able to do that so directly because I have so much work. So what I do is I open up my activities to them. So if they wish to come to a seminar I'm hosting for NGOs, they can come. Or if they want to come to a UN seminar cap, they can come, and they came just last month before the most recent lockdown. So they have a different way of learning from the field. I think that's very important. So it's not just bookish learning, but it's experiential learning, which is exactly what learning is about. I mean, learning is learning by doing and not from books. And the sorts of information I give them and that we share is not a bookish thing at all. It's from experience and from the field. And the other side is slightly ethical angle to education. You know, a lot of them also look up to the UN as a sort of rather high body.
Yes. Salaries,
very
like that,
attractive.
Yeah.
Slightly glossy in a way in terms of impressions. And I have to say to them always that if you really want to work for the UN, the Human Rights Arm, please don't look at the gloss. Please don't look at the carapace. If you go into the UN, don't think of it as a business to have a nice title, to get privileges,
good salary,
well paid,
good car, okay.
Children go to good schools. Don't just think like that. Don't just think like that. Think of it as you are going to be privileged. So you should do a bit more for people.
For people, okay.
Who are not so privileged.
That's why you're privileged, yeah.
Be more caring, precisely because it's a glossy affair, but look at it as a means to make change, constructive change, to help other people who are less privileged than ourselves. So that's what I convey to them. In terms of the ethic of grounded and you know, be kind, be helpful, be human, be humane.
Yeah, great lesson. So final question, what is the most important thing for your life? Just one word.
Most important thing in my life.
Coincident? Or what is the most important thing for you? It's just not your question, but just some most important principle in your life.
I could answer in many ways. I mean, as a human being, I would say love and friendship.
Love and friendship. As a human being, yeah, for a human being,
as
right?
A human
great.
Being.
Yes,
as
great.
a coincidental academic, I would say to be a catalyst. I want my work to create ripples of change and for the betterment of human lives and nature. Life. So I don't look at books and articles as ends. I look at them as means to an end. And the end is quite obvious. It's about peace, human rights, democracy, sustainable development, environmental protection, all these things. So yeah, to be a catalyst and to look at the subject of human rights, not just as an end, but as a means to a fuller end, to realize, to enable the realization of human potential in a humane environment that is respectful of nature and enables us to survive together.
Praise. Yeah, for an hour, we were very much impressed by a great international lawyer as well as great human rights activist and great philosopher. Just your lessons are really fruitful and give us a promising future for especially younger generation of Asia, because there are many the Asian lawyers are starting international law at the moment. So I think some international law research and practice is very promising in Asia, right? So yeah.
Just one word.
Okay.
I want to thank you very warmly for enabling me to link up, and I hope that humbly some of the information is useful. I wish to thank the university, Chulalongkorn University, that has hosted me for 40 years. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've been given. The university has enabled me to work very freely. You know, I travel so much.
Wow.
Also, both locally and internationally, and the university has always been very kind. So I'm very grateful to friends and family at the law faculty, Chulalongkorn. And last bit of information, in my later years at the moment, I'm trying to do a little nice gift for the law faculty, and that is to write 3 textbooks and to give the copyright to the law faculty as a token of my appreciation. So book number 1 is out. All right, it's available on the internet and so on. It's called The Core Human Rights Treaties in Thailand.
Yeah.
It's published by Brill Nijhoff in the Netherlands. And that is about all the 9 human rights treaties in Thailand, from my perspective. The second one is coming out soon. And the second one is called Challenges of International Law in the Asian Region, an introduction. So it's about various challenges of international law in our region. From Springer. It's
just stop
coming out
here. I was a reviewer of your book for Springer.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm one of the
so I hope it's useful. And so that's coming out. But the copyright is going to the university, so I don't get anything. It's just a thank you. And third one I'm working on now is to be about humanitarian law, which I also enjoy doing, about warfare and ASEAN, unless I change my mind. So I'm starting to work on that. And then, as I said, I'm starting on the new mandate, the UN mandate on Cambodia. And I don't want to forget my most recent mandate before Cambodia, because I think it's important for people to realize that one tries to work on various issues where possible to help promote change. I was also the first UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination in regard to sexual orientation and gender identity. So all the LGBTI issues I covered then, and I still cover, and I'm still teaching and promoting an understanding on this. So that's the sort of transversal link through a variety of activities, not just the UN at all, but through the university, through civil society, through media and others. Maybe a sort of check and balance for myself also, whereby I can decentralize my communications skills and techniques and knowledge base to spread out and ripple.
Okay, I'd like to just keep in touch with you continuously. And thank you so much. I would really, really great appreciate your accepting our humble invitations. So I think our interview session will be more visible and spreading out to the world by way of you. And I personally, I wish I would just visit you in Thailand, in Bangkok, as soon as possible after COVID-19 is going out. So we just watch, pray everything is going to be normal. So
I hope so. I hope so. And I look forward to visit your country again.
Yeah,
I missed out. I should have been there 2 months ago.
Where?
2 or 3 months ago. You had a launch of the UN report on children deprived of liberty.
Yeah.
And I was one of the advisory board members, so I still work on that. And you had a launch in Seoul. So I'm now tracking the follow-up in your country, and all the best with that. I think it's very important. Let's get children out of prison. No children behind bars.
Yeah, anytime you just keep in touch with me when you just come to Korea. So I would just pick a ride you from the airport. Right. Thank you so much, Saul.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So the final report will be will be will be sent to you for final review. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. 감사합니다.